In 27 years running SEAL candidates through this facility, Master Chief Conrad Harmon had never been completely catastrophically wrong about someone. Until the morning a 110-pound redhead stepped off the bus. He would think about that later. About how certainty can become a kind of blindness. About how a man can spend nearly 3 decades training his eyes to see clearly and still miss everything that matters most. But that morning, standing on the parade ground as the transport pulled through the main gate, Harmon watched 25 recruits file off the bus and made his calculations the way he always did. Fast, automatic, pattern recognition compressed into seconds of assessment. He was wrong about one of them, not slightly wrong, not wrong in the way a man is wrong when he misjudges how much fight someone has left. Wrong in the way that makes you sit in your office 3 days later, staring at a photograph on your phone, wondering how you missed it. Wrong in the way that stays with you long after the particulars of it have faded. This is that story. But first we need to go back 4 days. To a locker room, to a photograph taken by accident, to the sound of a shutter clicking at exactly the wrong moment, and to 2 sets of dog tags on a single chain catching the light under fluorescent bulbs and briefly illuminating everything. The photograph was taken at 0630 on a Thursday morning in the women's locker room of Naval Special Warfare Training Facility at Coronado, California. The photographer was Sarah Calloway, 26 years old, 4 years Navy, recently separated from service, carrying her phone because she had been taking pictures of the base to send to her parents. Her brother Jake was training there. She wanted them to see where he was. She turned a corner too fast. Her bag swung wide. The impact was nothing, a glancing blow against a small woman in a standard-issue towel who had been reaching for the shower handle. The towel slipped. It caught at the elbows. For 3 seconds, something hung exposed that was not a body. 2 sets of dog tags on a single chain. Sarah had been Navy long enough to read rank insignia in her sleep. She knew what she was looking at before her brain fully registered it. Her phone was already in her hand. The camera app was already open from the morning's photographs. The shutter clicked once. Then Sarah's brain caught up to her fingers and she understood what she had done. By that evening, the photograph would be shared 50 times across base social media. By the following morning, it would reach Master Chief Harmon's phone. And within 48 hours, it would reach a man named Derek Voss, who was 3 time zones away in Washington, and who would look at it and allow himself a small private satisfaction. But all of that was still 4 days away. 4 days earlier, a bus was pulling through the gate, and Harmon was making calculations he would spend weeks revising. Here is what you need to understand before we go further. This is a story about capability and assumption, about the distance between what a person looks like and what a person can do, about a system built by human beings, which means it carries every flaw and every blind spot that human beings carry baked into its foundations, the way cracks live in concrete, invisible until the load gets heavy enough. It is also a story about a woman named Maya Callahan who understood that system better than almost anyone alive, and who chose to walk back into it in an oversized uniform and boots 3 sizes too large, carrying the weight of a promise she had made at a graveside 2 years before. By the end of the week, she would save 4 lives in open water. She would lead a search and rescue through rugged terrain in deteriorating weather before dawn. She would face a man who helped cause her mentor's death, and she would say something to him that he would carry for the rest of his life. But none of that would matter if she could not survive the first morning. And on the first morning, standing in formation on the parade ground, while 24 people looked at her the way people look at something that does not belong, surviving meant something different than it usually did. It meant staying quiet, staying patient, letting them be wrong. For now, the transport arrived at 14:30 hours on a Sunday afternoon in late August. Late summer in Coronado, California. The Pacific Ocean a mile to the west flat and brilliant under a sky the color of bleached denim. The air smelled of salt and aviation fuel, and the dry heat that settles over the San Diego Peninsula in August like a held breath. Harmon stood at the edge of the parking area with his hands clasped behind his back and watched the door open. He had done this hundreds of times. Watched the door open, watched them file out, started reading them before their boots hit the pavement. It was not arrogance, it was experience. You looked at how they moved, how they held their shoulders, whether their eyes went wide or went flat when they saw the facility for the first time. You looked at 100 small things and assembled them into a first impression. The first 24 recruits gave him what he expected. A former college linebacker who moved like he owned whatever room he was in, which meant he had never been in a room designed to break him. A Boston construction worker with forearms like rope and the contained energy of a man who had spent 15 years proving himself through physical labor. a former police officer who had scanned every exit before she had even looked at the facility, which was either training or survival instinct, and in Harmon's experience, the two were hard to separate. A young California kid with the easy physical confidence of someone who had grown up in open water, who looked at the ocean in the distance the way other people look at home. And then, the last one off the bus. Harmon's calculations stopped. She was 5 feet 2 inches tall, perhaps 5 feet 2.5 if she was being generous. She could not have weighed more than 115 pounds. Her hair was red, pulled back in a regulation bun, already escaping at the temples in the afternoon heat. Her skin was pale and dusted with freckles that darkened across her nose where the sun hit directly. She wore standard-issue fatigues, approximately 3 sizes too large. The cuffs rolled at the wrists, the waist cinched with a belt that still left the fabric billowing around her like something borrowed. Her boots were the smallest the supply depot had. They still looked like boats on her feet. She stepped off the bus and looked around at the facility with green eyes that were calm. Completely, entirely calm. The kind of calm Harmon had learned over decades was either the calm of someone who had no idea what was coming, or the calm of someone who knew exactly what was coming and had already decided they could handle it. He could not tell which this was. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. She moved toward the forming line with quiet efficiency, neither first nor last, not drawing attention, not avoiding it, just moving. And there was something in how she moved that snagged on the edge of his pattern recognition and would not let go. A precision, an economy, like someone who had learned a long time ago to waste nothing. He filed it away and returned his attention to the group. What he did not know, standing there in the August heat making his assessments, was that he was already 3 days into being completely wrong about her. He just did not know it yet. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Maya Callahan, 28 years old, Navy SEAL, 8 years of service. One of fewer than a dozen women to hold that rank in naval special warfare. She had completed BUDS training at 20, the youngest woman in the program's history at that point. She had served with SEAL Team 3 for 6 years. She had deployed to 4 combat theaters, participated in 37 classified operations, and received commendations she was not permitted to discuss in public. She had also 3 months before climbing onto that transport bus requested and received authorization for a mission unlike any she had previously undertaken. The mission was this: walk into a SEAL preparatory training cohort as a candidate with minimal background information shared with training staff and spend 2 weeks documenting how long it took for demonstrated capability to override initial physical assessment. Measure the gap between what the training system saw when it looked at her on day 1 and what the training system was forced to acknowledge by day 14. Collect the data, write the report. Give the findings to people with the authority and the will to act on them. The mission had been approved by Admiral Robert Haynes. It was known to Captain Elise Hargrove, who monitored the evaluation from the administrative side, and it was known to one other person on the facility whose involvement would not become clear until the 3rd day. That was the official mission. The personal one was harder to explain even to herself. Maya stood in the women's bathroom on the ground floor of Barracks Building C 40 minutes after arriving while her cohort was still processing paperwork 3 buildings away. She had slipped away for 2 minutes. She needed 2 minutes. She looked at herself in the mirror, red hair escaping its bun freckles, dark from the bus ride, and the August sun-green eyes that had aged in the last 2 years in ways that had nothing to do with time. She pulled the collar of her shirt aside. 2 sets of dog tags on a single chain. The first set was hers, name, rank, service number, blood type, standard issue. The second set belonged to Commander Rachel Aldridge, United States Navy, KIA Syria 2022. Rachel Aldridge had been 5 feet 3 inches tall. She had looked, her students used to say, like somebody's favorite aunt. She had been able to outshoot, outthink, and outlast almost any operator she had ever worked alongside. She had been a SEAL for 14 years and a mentor for most of them, and she had died pulling 3 men out of a collapsed building in a Syrian city whose name Maya still could not say out loud without feeling something open in her chest that she could not immediately close again. Rachel had been right about the building, right about the explosives inside it, right about exactly where the charges were placed and when they would detonate. She had submitted her assessment in writing 40 minutes before the mission launched. The team leader had overridden it. He had called her analysis overly cautious. He had used words that Maya had read in the after-action report and had not been able to stop hearing since. 3 men had nearly died. Rachel Aldridge had died saving them. Maya looked at the second set of tags in the mirror and made the same promise she made every morning. "Show them, Rachel." Then she tucked the tags back under her shirt, straightened her uniform, and walked back to join her cohort. In a conference room at the Pentagon at roughly the same hour, a man named Commander Derek Voss was reading a briefing document he had requested through back channels 2 weeks earlier. The document outlined the details of Maya Callahan's evaluation mission, her cover identity, her timeline, the cohort she had been embedded with, the names of the training staff who knew her true identity. Voss was 48 years old, 26 years in the Navy. His face carried the particular weathering of someone who had spent significant portions of his adult life outdoors in conditions that were not designed for comfort, and his posture was that of a man who had never once in those 26 years backed down from something he believed in. He read the document carefully. Then he read it again. He was not a stupid man. He was not a cruel man. He was something more dangerous than either a man who had built an entire architecture of belief on top of a wound he had never properly examined. In 2009, a female operator in his unit had been injured during an extraction mission in a way that compromised the outcome and endangered the rest of the team. He had watched it happen. He had carried the weight of that afternoon for 15 years, and somewhere along the way, the weight had calcified into certainty, into institutional opinion, into the kind of position that gets a man listened to in certain rooms where policy is shaped. He was not wrong about everything. He was wrong about the specific thing that mattered most. He was wrong about Rachel Aldridge. He had been the team leader in Syria. He had read her assessment and overridden it. He had used words in that conversation that he had never repeated to anyone, and that visited him at 3 a.m. more often than he would ever admit. He reached for his phone and made a call. Within 48 hours, he had arranged to be assigned as an evaluation reviewer at Coronado, ostensibly to ensure objectivity and methodological rigor. In reality, to be close enough to control what the evaluation found before it could find anything that could not be taken back. He allowed himself a quiet satisfaction at the efficiency of it. He was not yet aware that Maya Callahan had been expecting exactly this move since the day she submitted her mission proposal. The first evening in the mess hall, Maya took a tray to a corner table with a sightline to the entire room. Old habit. Know your exits, know your angles, know who is watching whom before you decide who you are in this space. Jake Calloway held court at the center table. He was 24 and built like the linebacker he had been for 3 years at a mid-sized Midwestern university, which meant he occupied space with physical authority that drew people toward him the way a fire draws people in from the dark. He talked about his grandfather, who had fought in the Pacific, his father, who had done 2 tours in the Gulf, 3 generations of Calloway men who had served, and Jake was here to add his name to that list. What he did not mention was the phone call he had made the night before. His father answering on the second ring and listening to Jake say he had arrived safely, and then offering a silence so complete it had its own weight. And then, "You know how I feel about this." And then the click of the call ending. 3 generations of warriors, and one of them had come home changed in ways he could not explain, and had spent 30 years trying to protect his son from the same change by never talking about it at all. Jake had misread the silence for disappointment rather than fear, and he had arrived at Coronado carrying the specific weight of a man trying to prove himself to someone who had already decided the proving was not worth the price. Marco Vitelli sat nearby but slightly apart. He was 38 with forearms tattooed in the manner of a man who had started collecting them young and added to them whenever something significant happened that he did not know how to say out loud. 15 years in construction, bridges, foundations, the structural bones of buildings that other people would spend their careers in without ever knowing his name. In his wallet, folded twice behind a photograph of his mother, was a GED certificate dated 11 months earlier. He had not told anyone. He was still deciding whether it was something to be proud of or something to be ashamed of, and he had not yet arrived at the answer that was obviously correct. Dana Reeves ate with the efficient economy of someone who treated meals as refueling rather than social occasions. Former Boston Police Department Tactical Response Unit. She had the eyes of someone who had spent years reading people for threats and found eventually that the threats came from directions she had not been trained to expect. She had left Boston PD 14 months earlier. On her laptop was a file containing evidence of systematic misconduct she had documented over 3 years. Evidence she had not yet submitted anywhere, and the reason she had not submitted it was that she knew what submitting it would cost and had not yet found a way to make the cost feel worth paying. Ryan Novak sat by himself at the end of a long table enclosed in the way of people who have learned to create their own privacy in shared spaces. 23 years old, lean, with the fitness of someone who had grown up in open water skin, bronze from seasons as a lifeguard on the California coast. In his wallet behind his driver's license was a photograph of his brother Alex. On the back, in Ryan's own handwriting, he didn't quit. But Ryan had never been able to fully believe his own inscription because quitting was the explanation the family had been given after Alex died during Hell Week 3 years ago. And the explanation had the shape of something true, even though Ryan had known his brother his entire life. And quitting was not a word that had ever applied to Alexander Novak, not once in anything. Maya observed all of them from her corner with the focused attention of 8 years in environments where reading people quickly and accurately was not an intellectual exercise, but an operational requirement. Then Marco's voice carried across the mess hall in the particular way voices carry when they are not trying to be quiet. Hey, little mouse. Not cruel exactly. Just the casual boundary testing that happens in new groups when people are trying to establish hierarchy before anyone has earned one. Maya looked up from her food. She looked at Marco with an absence of any expected reaction. No embarrassment, no anger, no performance of either. Just patience, so complete that his expression started losing its shape around the edges. She swallowed what she was eating, took a sip of water. I'll manage. 2 words, completely level. No performance in them at all. Marco looked away first. Dana Reeves, 2 tables over, had been watching. She noted the reaction time, the quality of the stillness, the complete absence of any social reflex that would have been normal and expected. She filed it alongside what she had noticed when Maya got off the bus, the way she moved. Not like someone learning to be precise. Like someone who had been precise for so long that precision had stopped being a decision and become a condition. Dana had spent 8 years in Boston making assessments like this. She was not wrong now. She was just not yet sure what she was right about. Lights out at 2200. The barracks settling into the charged quiet of a first night in an unfamiliar place with a difficult morning coming. Maya lay in her bunk and listened to the darkness arrange itself around her. She could hear the ocean. This close to the water, you could always hear it. She had learned 8 years ago on a night very much like this one to find that sound steadying. Rachel had taught her that. Find your anchor, Rachel had said. Find the thing that is bigger than you and let it remind you that you are smaller than the problem, but still here, still in it, still moving. She reached under her shirt, touched both sets of tags, held them a moment. Tomorrow would be the run. 5 miles at a pace calibrated to find out who had prepared and who had assumed their existing conditioning would carry them. She knew what she would see. She knew which category each of her cohort fell into based on one evening of observation. She also knew what she would have to decide about each of them. The mission required her to document the gap between appearance and assessment. It did not require her to watch people drown when she had the capability to throw a rope. That was the edge she would be walking. She had told Admiral Haynes when he approved the mission that she understood the parameters, that she would maintain cover, that she would not intervene in ways that would compromise the evaluation's integrity. She had meant it when she said it. She already knew she could not keep it entirely. Because Rachel had also taught her this, the mission matters, but the people in front of you matter more. When you have to choose life. The data can wait. The person drowning cannot. Maya Callahan had never in her life watched someone drown when she had the capability to prevent it. She was not going to start now. Across the base in his office, Harmon sat at his desk and looked at the roster. His eyes kept returning to one name, Callahan Maya. The way she had looked at him when he had suggested she might be in the wrong program. That was not the look of someone uncertain. He had spent a long time learning to read that look, and what he saw in her was not uncertainty. He just could not name what it was. He picked up his phone and sent a message to Captain Hargrove. Something odd about one of the new candidates. Recommend additional background check. The response came back in 4 minutes. Background is need to know. Continue training as normal. Do not single out for additional scrutiny. Need to know. In his experience, those 3 words always meant the same thing. We are not going to tell you, and when you find out, you will understand why we didn't. He saved the message, closed the phone, looked out the window toward the dark barracks. Something didn't add up. He could feel it the way you feel weather changing before the sky gives you any evidence. Tomorrow would be the run. Tomorrow he would start finding out what he was missing. And in a corner bunk in Barracks Building C, a woman who had outrun nearly everyone she had ever trained with fell asleep to the sound of the Pacific with 2 sets of tags against her chest and a promise she intended to keep in the patience of someone who had decided long ago that the only way to change a system was to walk all the way into the center of it and make it look at what it was doing. She had 4 days before the photograph. She intended to use every hour. The run happened the way Maya knew it would. Dawn came in over the Pacific in stages. Gray going pink, going gold, the particular California morning that makes the world look cleaner than it is. 25 recruits stood on the parade ground in the coastal cold that lives just before sunrise, breath clouding bodies tight with the specific anxiety of people about to find out something about themselves they cannot unknow. Harmon set the pace from the front, 5 miles. No mercy in the cadence. Maya ran in the middle of the pack. This was a choice. She had the ability to run at the front, had run distances in conditions that made this morning look like a warm-up. She had covered 6 miles through Afghan heat with 60 pounds of kit and a wounded teammate. She had run a marathon once backwards, while her team ran normally for charity and crossed the finish line before two-thirds of the field. This 5-mile Coronado run in cool air, with a tailwind off the water, was not a physical challenge. The challenge was making it look like it was. Controlled breathing, box rhythm, in 4 counts, hold 4 out, 4 hold 4. SEAL technique for oxygen management during sustained effort. Her body did it automatically the way other people's bodies automatically maintain balance. At mile 2, Jake Calloway started to struggle. She had expected this. His college linebacker conditioning was built around explosive power in short, violent bursts. The body that had been an asset for 3 years of college football was now a liability in sustained cardiovascular work, and she could see it happening in real time. Posture caving forward, strides shortening neck and shoulders, absorbing effort that should be going through the legs. His face had gone from determined to red to a gray-white that preceded a body making decisions without consulting the person inside it. Maya moved closer, voice low enough that only he could hear. She told him about the egg beater kick, about economy of movement, about letting the body do what it was designed to do rather than fighting it. She gave him the breathing pattern and watched him try it, watched his stride stabilize, watched the gray-white pull back from the edge. He looked at her with eyes that were startled in a way that had nothing to do with the running. What she had not accounted for was Marco Vitelli 8 feet back and to the left watching. Marco had spent 15 years reading job sites, reading structural assessments in a glance, reading the body language of foremen and engineers, reading the silent conversations between people in rooms where decisions were being made. He was in ways no formal assessment had recognized extraordinarily perceptive. He watched Maya not look at Jake while she helped him. He watched her eyes, which were on Harmon at the front of the pack, who was periodically turning to survey the group. And Marco understood something with the sudden, complete clarity of a man who spends his life reading spaces. She is not just helping him, she is calculating what Harmon can see from where he is standing. He glanced at Dana running nearby with the metronomic efficiency of someone who had trained long and specifically for exactly this. She was already looking back at him. He could see she had seen the same thing. He mouthed one word at her. She nodded once and looked away. They finished the run. 17 of 25 completed without incident. Jake Calloway crossed the finish line, barely legs shaking, and looked at Maya with the expression of a man revising a significant assumption. Marco Vitelli finished strong, said nothing, and spent the recovery period watching the woman in the oversized uniform, the way a man watches a building whose foundation he suspects is more interesting than the exterior suggests. The obstacle course happened on day 2. Gunnery Sergeant Brett Kowalski ran the hand-to-hand portion. Former Force Recon Marine cross-trained with SEAL instructors for 3 years, a catalog of technique stored in his nervous system that he had spent 30 years adding to. He watched Maya's defense sequence with the focused attention of someone who recognizes what he is seeing and is having trouble placing it in a context that makes sense. The technique was SEAL curriculum, not the rough approximation of someone who had trained with someone who once knew someone military. The exact counter, the exact application, the exact transitions executed with precision that required not months but years of mat time. Kowalski stood at the edge of the training area afterward and looked at Harmon. Harmon looked back. They had a conversation using only the vocabulary of men who have worked alongside each other long enough to communicate without speaking. Something is wrong here. I know. What do? We keep training, we watch. That evening, 2 things happened simultaneously. Dana Reeves sat on her bunk in Barrack C and went through everything she had observed in 48 hours, the way she used to go through case files, systematic, one element at a time, the way 8 years of investigations had trained her to organize information until the shape of it became clear. And in the administrative building across the facility, Commander Derek Voss arrived from Washington. Chief Sean Walsh had been training Navy divers for 15 years and had known who Maya Callahan was on the day the manifest crossed his desk. He was 51, built like someone who had spent those years in the water, lean in the way of endurance athletes, face weathered by chlorine and salt air, and the particular exposure of working outdoors in all conditions. Rachel Aldridge's name appeared in Maya's training log in 2019, and Aldridge's name was not one Walsh had ever been able to read without feeling the weight that comes with owing someone a debt that cannot be properly repaid. 2011. Walsh had been running a training evolution that went wrong in a way that was partly his fault and partly circumstance, and mostly the result of a decision made under pressure that he would not have made with more time. The fallout had been heading toward his career with the momentum of something inevitable when Aldridge had intervened. Not officially, not through channels, just a quiet conversation with the right person at the right moment using capital she had accumulated over years of being someone whose judgment people trusted. She had never mentioned it to him again. She had never asked for anything in return. That was who she was. So on day 3, when Maya surfaced from the underwater navigation course at 3 minutes and 47 seconds faster than several members of Walsh's instructor cadre could manage on a clear day, he waited until the others were occupied and pulled her aside. He told her he had known since day 1. He told her about Aldridge in 2011. He told her he had been covering for her not because of orders, but because he understood what she was doing, and because Aldridge had once done something for him that he had been trying to figure out how to honor ever since. Maya looked at him for a moment. The photo, she said, "It's already spreading. I can't stop it anymore." She nodded slowly. Something shifted in her expression, not fear, but the look of someone updating a calculation, integrating new information, adjusting the timeline. "How long do we have?" "Before Harmon puts it together officially," Walsh said. "Maybe a day, before it reaches someone with authority to end the evaluation." He paused. Voss arrived last night. Maya went very still. She had expected this. She had built contingencies for it. But there is a difference between expecting something and hearing it confirmed, between abstract preparation and the specific weight of a name spoken aloud in a room that smells of chlorine. She said nothing for a long moment. "Thank you, Chief, for all of it." Walsh looked at her steadily. "Don't thank me yet. He's going to come at this hard. He has reasons." "I know his reasons." "I know you do," Walsh said. "That's what worries me." The rescue happened at 1340 hours on day 3. A civilian fishing vessel, 42 feet, had capsized approximately 1.8 miles offshore. 4 people aboard. Coast Guard was 23 minutes out. Swells running 4 to 6 feet and increasing. Water temperature 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The variables pointed in one direction. The call went out. Walsh assembled his team. Maya was in her rescue gear before the briefing was complete. Harmon watched from the dock as the boat was prepared. He watched her move through the preparation with the unhurried efficiency of someone for whom this was not new. The way she checked equipment by touch without looking down, the way she was already discussing approach angles and victim management with Walsh before the rest of the team had finished suiting up. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back and felt the last coherent structure of his initial assessment come apart. The boat went out into building seas. The cohort stood on the dock with borrowed binoculars. They had been told to stand by for support. What they ended up doing over the next 40 minutes was watching. The first 2 victims were visible on debris in the chop. Maya reached them in sequence, applied flotation, talked them through it in the calm voice of someone who has pulled people from bad water before and knows that the voice matters as much as the grip. She got them to the boat. The 3rd victim was on the outer hull of the capsized vessel. The 4th was underneath it. Walsh said they should wait for the Coast Guard dive team. Protocol: the risk profile of going under a capsized hull in building seas exceeded what he was authorized to approve. Maya looked at the hull, at the water, at Walsh. They have maybe 12 minutes of breathable air. Coast Guard is still 14 minutes out. Walsh held her gaze for a moment. "Your call, Commander." She went in. What happened under that hull in the dark and cold, and the disorientation of an inverted space where nothing was where it should be, is nearly impossible to render in words. The water temperature stole heat from her body with patient, impersonal efficiency. Visibility was near zero. The structural debris shifted with each swell, constantly changing the environment in ways she could not fully predict. She navigated by touch and spatial memory, and the 3-dimensional orientation that comes from thousands of hours of training in exactly these conditions. She found the first air pocket near the helm station. She found the 3rd victim there, a woman in her early 40s with a broken arm and the tight-faced expression of someone in serious pain who has been holding themselves together through will alone. And beside her in the shrinking air pocket was a young woman Maya did not immediately recognize. She was perhaps 24. She had the fitness profile of an athlete, the lean efficiency of someone who had trained hard and specifically. Her face, even in the dim shifting light beneath the hull, showed something beyond the fear of immediate danger. a depth of exhaustion that had been there before the boat capsized. The kind that comes not from physical effort, but from having a decision made about you that you had no power to contest. Maya got them both to the surface. She made 3 dives, total 18 minutes of work, in the dark and the cold. The final dive brought up an elderly man from a second air pocket further aft, disoriented from a head injury, asking where his wife was. His wife was already on the boat, wrapped in thermal blankets, asking where he was. 4 people alive. The Coast Guard helicopter arrived to find everyone already out of the water. Walsh said nothing for a long moment when Maya climbed aboard. Then quietly, "That was the most complete piece of water work I have seen in 15 years." Maya was breathing hard now, the first time anyone had seen her breathing hard in 3 days. She looked toward the dock where her cohort stood with binoculars, and she understood that the calculation had shifted. The question was no longer whether they would figure out what she was. The question was what they would do when they did. On the dock, Dana Reeves slowly lowered her binoculars. "Nobody learns to move like that from growing up near the water," she said. To no one in particular, but loud enough to carry. It was not an accusation yet, but it was close. In the debrief room, Maya learned who the young woman was. Her name was Petty Officer Amber Cole, 24 years old. She had been dropped from SEAL preparatory training 6 weeks earlier on the grounds that she did not meet physical standards. Her technical assessment scores, which Walsh quietly confirmed, had placed her in the top 30% of her cohort. Her marks on underwater navigation, hand-to-hand technique, and tactical problem-solving under stress had been exceptional. She had been dropped because of a pre-assessment form completed before she ever stepped on the mat. She had submitted her paperwork for separation from service 4 days ago. She had been on the water alone because she did not know where else to go to think. Maya sat with this information. She thought about Rachel Aldridge submitting her assessment in writing 40 minutes before the Syria mission and being overridden by a man who had already decided he knew what he knew. The parallel had the precision of something geometric, the same mechanism, the same direction of failure, the same human cost arriving in a different form. Maya wrote Amber Cole's name in her evaluation notes. She underlined it twice. Derek Voss was good at this kind of work. He observed training sessions with the focused attention of a man looking for errors and found to his growing irritation very few. He reviewed Maya's evaluation notes and found them meticulous. He attended the hand-to-hand session and interrupted to question her methodology and found himself outmaneuvered by her response with an efficiency that left him briefly without words. He had not expected her to be this capable. He had known she was highly decorated. He had read the file. But there is a distance between reading a file and watching someone operate, and watching Maya Callahan operate was doing something to his carefully maintained architecture of certainty that he was not prepared for. He did what men do when certainty is threatened by evidence. He looked for angles. He found Dana Reeves. He had read every personnel file in the cohort. Dana's offered the most specific leverage point, not because she was weak, but because her wound was precise. He found her during a break in afternoon training, standing alone near the fence line looking at the water. He was careful with his words. He had learned to be very careful. He told her she had good instincts, that the instincts of a trained investigator were exactly what she was currently experiencing, and that they were correct. He told her that the cohort had been enrolled in an evaluation without their consent, that their responses, their conversations, their personal disclosures had been collected as data in a study designed to confirm a conclusion already decided before Maya stepped on the bus. He was careful to make it sound like concern, like respect for her intelligence. He was careful not to say anything entirely untrue, because the most effective manipulation is the kind that uses real facts in a false architecture. Dana listened. She did not respond. She looked at the ocean. When Voss walked away, she stood at the fence for another 3 minutes. That evening at dinner, it was Dana who said it. "She's not who she says she is." The table went quiet. Jake looked up. Marco had been waiting for this conversation. Ryan looked at his food. "She's evaluating us," Dana said. "Everything we've said to her, everything she's observed. It's data. She saved my life on the run," Jake said. "I know, she went under that hull. She pulled 4 people out. I know that too." Dana set down her fork. "It doesn't change what she is, what we are to her." It was not anger exactly, it was the specific pain of someone who had learned again that the thing she chose to trust had a different shape underneath than it appeared on the surface. She had come here looking for an institution with actual integrity. She was sitting across from someone who might be proof that integrity and deception could coexist in the same person, and she did not know what to do with that. What she did not know was that Voss had lit a fire with exactly the properties he needed. What she also did not know was that Maya, 2 tables away, had heard every word. The audio file arrived in Admiral Haynes's secure inbox at 0900 the following morning. Voss presented it in a formal meeting with Haynes Hargrove and a JAG officer. The file was a radio recording from the Syria mission. Clear audio. Aldridge's voice. Moving in on Voss's call. His read is solid. Haynes listened to it twice. His face showed nothing. Voss made his case with the calm precision of a man who had been preparing it for months. The recording demonstrated that Aldridge had agreed with his assessment in the field. Her death was a combat casualty, tragic and irreversible, but not the product of institutional failure. Maya Callahan's evaluation was not objective analysis, but a personal crusade dressed in methodological language. The findings should be suspended pending review. After the meeting, Hargrove found Maya and delivered the information without editorializing. Maya sat with it. She knew the recording was incomplete. She knew with the certainty of someone who had read every classified page of the Syria after action in the weeks after the funeral that Rachel had submitted a formal objection to the mission plan. She knew the recording Voss had presented was not the whole of what Rachel had said, but she could not prove that yet. And without the proof, the evaluation was standing on ice that had just gotten significantly thinner. That night, Maya went to the water, not the pool, the ocean. She climbed down the rocks at the facility's edge and sat on a flat stone above the waterline with her boots off the Pacific washing up around the rock in the dark, irregular instant. She had the tags in her hand, both sets. This was the thing she did not let herself do very often. Sit with it. Not analyze it, not build contingencies around it, not convert it into operational variables. Just sit with the weight of 2 sets of tags on a single chain. The specific mathematics of loss. Rachel had known she was walking into that building. Had known because she was the one who had identified the charges. Had known where they were and when they would go. Had submitted the assessment. Had been overridden, had gone in anyway. Because 3 people needed to come out. Because that was who she was. Maya sat on the rock and asked herself the question she had been circling for 2 years. Was she here because of Rachel, or was she here because of what had been done to Rachel, which was a different thing, a thing that had more anger in it, more personal need? Was this mission what it claimed to be? Or was it underneath the evaluation protocols? A 2-year-old fury wearing the clothes of institutional reform? And if it was the latter, did that make it wrong? She did not hear Decker approach. Senior Chief Earl Decker moved quietly for a man of 68, which was either the product of 50 years of military discipline or simply the way some people were in the world. He had 30 years of Navy behind him and 20 years of retirement in front of him, and he was still here, still at Coronado, because this was where his life had meaning, and he had learned at considerable cost not to walk away from meaning when you found it. He had known Rachel Aldridge since she was 22 years old, and completing BUD/S and making everyone around her recalibrate what they thought they understood about the range of human capability. He sat down on the rock beside Maya without asking permission and looked at the water for a while. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his jacket, a challenge coin, worn smooth by 30 years of handling, the kind of smoothness that comes not from age, but from being touched, from being carried through things, from being held by someone who needed to hold something real. Rachel gave me this in 1994, he said, the day she graduated BUD/S. She said, keep this until someone needs it more than I do. He turned it once in his fingers. The perimeter lights caught the surface, a hand reaching down, another hand reaching up. I've kept it 30 years. He set it in Maya's palm. She looked at it. She did not say anything, because there was nothing adequate to say, and she had learned from Rachel that silence in the right moment was not absence, but presence. The ocean moved around the rock, the Pacific doing what it had always done, indifferent to everything beneath it, and enormous in proportion to everything else. Maya closed her hand around the coin. She had been sitting here, trying to determine whether this was about Rachel or about her own anger, and she understood now, with the coin in her hand and the night air cold off the water, and an old man beside her who had known Rachel before Maya was born, that the question was wrongly framed. It was both. It had always been both. The anger was real, and the purpose was real, and the two did not cancel each other out. They were the same thing seen from 2 different angles. Rachel had gone into the building knowing the risk. She had gone anyway, because 3 people needed to come out, because that was what the mission required, because sometimes the only way to honor what you believe in is to walk all the way into the thing that might break you and trust that the work is worth the cost. He has an audio file, Maya said. He's using it to make the case that Rachel agreed with his assessment. I know, Decker said. She looked at him. Rachel sent me a package 48 hours before Syria, told me to open it only if it was necessary. His voice was level, factual. I've been waiting 2 years for necessary. Maya felt something shift in her chest. Not relief exactly, something more complicated. Is it what I think it is? Decker reached into his other pocket. A USB drive. Small. Unremarkable. She was thorough, he said. She always was. Maya took the drive and held it alongside the coin. Two small objects. Their mass was nothing. The weight of what they contained was everything. She sat with both of them for a moment looking at the water. Then she put on her boots. There was work to do. And somewhere across the facility, Derek Voss was sitting in his temporary office believing he had already won. He had not yet been invited to reconsider that belief. That was coming. The USB drive contained 4 files. The first was a written assessment dated 48 hours before the Syria mission in which Commander Rachel Aldridge formally documented her analysis of the target building, identified the specific structural locations where explosive charges had been placed based on intelligence she had gathered, and cross-referenced across 3 separate sources and recommended mission abort pending reassessment of the entry plan. The document was 7 pages. It was precise. It was thorough in the way Rachel was thorough about everything, which meant it left no room for the comfortable fog of alternative interpretation. The second file was a communications log showing that the assessment had been received, opened, and read by Derek Voss at 13:47 hours was on the day of the mission, 41 minutes before the team entered the building. The third file was the full radio recording, not the excerpt Voss had presented to Admiral Haynes. The complete record. Maya listened to it once sitting at a small desk in an empty briefing room with the door closed, the overhead light the only illumination. Rachel's voice came through the speaker with a clarity that was almost unbearable. Moving in on Voss's call, his read is solid. Then 11 seconds later, in a different register. Lower, the voice of a person choosing to say the true thing even when the true thing would not change the outcome. For the record, I am flagging this assessment as high risk. I am requesting mission abort. This is not a solid read. I am proceeding under direct order. 11 seconds. The version Voss had presented contained the first sentence, not the second. Maya sat with the recording for a long time after it ended. She did not replay it. She had Rachel's voice in her memory from 100 training sessions, in 2 deployments, in a gravesite in Arlington on a cold November morning, and what she heard in those final transmitted words was not defeat, was not resignation, was a person doing what Rachel had done, her entire career telling the truth into the record, even when the record was the only witness, even when the people with authority to act on it had already made their decision because the truth mattered regardless of whether it was convenient. She had gone into the building anyway. She had pulled 3 men out. She had died doing it. And someone had cut 11 seconds out of her last transmission to make sure her final act of professional honesty remained buried. The fourth file was a single page, handwritten. Rachel's handwriting, which Maya would have recognized anywhere, compressed, imprecise, and slightly uphill, on the page the way left-handed people's writing sometimes drifted. Earl, if you're reading this, something went wrong. Give this to whoever needs it most. The truth has a way of waiting. R. Maya read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the breast pocket of her uniform against her chest next to the tags. She did not go to Haynes that night. She understood the impulse, the urgency that comes from holding evidence that resolves something long unresolved. But 8 years in environments where the wrong move at the wrong moment turned manageable problems into fatal ones had taught her the discipline of patience, even when patience was the hardest available choice. She spent 2 hours in the briefing room preparing, organizing the files, building the documentation the way Rachel had taught her, clear, sequential, leaving no gap that a motivated opponent could exploit. When she was done, she had a folder that was as close to irrefutable as documents can be. Then she went to her bunk and slept 4 hours and was awake before the alarm. The search and rescue happened at 0500 before any of the larger confrontation came to a head. 2 candidates from a different training cohort had not returned from a night navigation exercise in the hills behind the facility. One had fallen on a descent in the dark, a fractured tibia confirmed by the angle in the sound and the fact that he could not stand. The other was with him, had done what first aid he could, and had his radio. Weather was moving in from the northwest, temperature dropping. Standard search and rescue deployment would take 90 minutes from initiation to contact. The candidates, by conservative estimate, could tolerate the conditions safely for approximately 80 minutes. Admiral Haynes made the call at 0512. Maya had her team assembled by 0517. She gave the briefing on the move, walking fast toward the equipment room with Jake and Marco and Dana and Ryan falling in around her. She had not resolved anything with Dana. The table conversation 2 nights before had not been revisited. There had been no reconciliation, no clarifying exchange. She briefed them as she would brief any team. Clear, complete, nothing wasted. 2 victims, known position based on last radio contact, modified grid search pattern, 2-team sweep with high ground coordination, comms every 5 minutes, medical protocols for fracture management in cold exposure. She told them what she expected of each of them specifically. Jake would carry the medical pack and manage primary patient care because she had watched him absorb every piece of tactical medicine instruction she had delivered in 4 days, with the focus of a man who understood that knowing something and being able to apply it under pressure were not the same thing, and who was determined to close that gap. Marco would handle communications and navigation because his spatial intelligence was the best in the cohort, and she had trusted spatial intelligence in operational environments over formal credentials for her entire career. Ryan would manage cold weather provisions and secondary patient care because he had grown up in and around water and understood hypothermia not as a clinical concept but as a physical reality he had seen and managed. And Dana would lead the second team. Dana looked at her when she said it. Maya held the look. Not challenging, not asking for anything, just steady. You have the best tactical read in this group, Maya said. I need your eyes on the eastern approach. Dana said nothing. She took the equipment and went. They moved out into the pre-dawn dark with headlamps cutting through the brush and the cold pressing down from the northwest with genuine intention. Marco found the first sign at 43 minutes in. Clothing fiber on a rock outcrop fresh. A direction of travel implied by the disturbance in the surrounding soil. Maya called it in, converged the teams, and followed the sign down a drainage that opened into a small clearing where her headlamp found 2 men, one supine and one kneeling beside him, and the supine one's leg at an angle that confirmed everything. Jake was on the ground beside the patient before Maya had finished assessing the scene. She watched him work. Tourniquet placement, correct. Splint improvised from tent poles and a compression bandage stable. Thermal blanket deployed, oral rehydration initiated. His hands were steady. His voice was calm in the particular way that calm voices are most valuable, which is when the person receiving them is frightened and in pain, and using the quality of another person's composure as evidence about how serious things really are. He did not need to be told what to do. He had learned it. He was doing it. Maya cleared the landing zone with Marco and Ryan while Dana managed communications and coordinated the medevac approach. The helicopter came in at 0631 against the sky just beginning to show pale light in the east, and both patients were evacuated. Both would recover fully. On the walk back down the hill, Dana came alongside Maya without announcement and matched her pace in silence for several minutes. Then the technique worked. Maya glanced at her. The fracture management. What you taught, Dana was looking at the path ahead. It worked when it needed to. It usually does. That's why it's taught. Another silence. Voss came to me 2 days ago, Dana said. He found the specific thing to say to make me doubt you, I know. He wasn't entirely wrong about the facts. No, he rarely is about the facts. It's the architecture he builds around them. Dana turned this over. I came here because I was tired of institutions that asked me to look away from what I could see clearly. She paused, and then I let someone use that against me. Maya walked for a moment before responding. The people who are best at manipulation find the real thing in you and lean on it. Your instinct to resist deception is real, and it's good. He just aimed it at the wrong target. Dana nodded once. Not absolution, an acknowledgement of something that would take longer to fully process. A beginning. That was enough for now. The hearing convened at 1000 hours in a conference room in the administrative building. Admiral Haynes at the head of the table, Captain Hargrove to his right, Voss across from Maya with the composed certainty of a man who believed the outcome had already been determined. He presented the audio file again, laid out his methodological objections to Maya's evaluation in organized sequence, argued that personal investment had compromised objectivity, that the findings could not be considered valid, that the evaluation should be suspended and the cohort transferred to standard training protocols immediately. He was articulate, experienced, the kind of man who had spent 26 years in rooms like this one and knew how to occupy them. Haynes listened without expression. Then a knock at the door. Hargrove opened it. Petty Officer Amber Cole stood in the corridor. She was out of the base medical facility ahead of schedule and had not been summoned. She was wearing her uniform. She was standing straight. She asked permission to enter. Haynes looked at her for a moment. He was 62 years old and had been making hard calls for 4 decades, and he had learned to read rooms the way some people read text quickly and with high comprehension. He looked at Amber Cole, took in who she was, understood something about why she was standing in his doorway, and said yes. She sat at the end of the table. She placed a single sheet of paper on the surface in front of her. She did not present arguments, did not construct a framework or cite policy documents or speak in the language of institutional processes. She looked at the people around the table and said what was true. I scored higher than 70% of the men in my cohort on technical assessment. My underwater navigation time was in the top quartile. My hand-to-hand evaluation rated as proficient. My tactical problem-solving scores were among the highest in the group. She touched the paper. This is my pre-assessment form. The box marked physical profile suitability was pre-checked, with concerns noted. It was completed before I stepped on the mat, before any instructor had observed me perform a single task. She slid the paper to the center of the table. I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here because someone pulled me out of the water 2 days ago, and I thought the least I could do was tell the truth in the same room where the truth is being decided. She stood up. That's all I had. She left. The room held the silence that follows when something simple and precise has been said in a space that has been full of complicated and qualified language, and everyone present is adjusting to the difference. Voss was looking at the paper in the center of the table. Haynes looked at Maya. Maya placed the USB drive on the table and said what the files contained. She did not editorialize. She presented the sequence, the written assessment, the communications log, establishing receipt, and review the complete audio recording and the handwritten note. She played the full recording once. Rachel's voice filled the room. Both sentences. When it ended, Hargrove looked at the table. Haynes looked at the middle distance. The JAG officer wrote something in her notebook. Voss sat very still. The hearing continued for another 40 minutes, but the shape of it had changed irrevocably the moment Rachel Aldridge's voice said for the record into a room where the record had always been 11 seconds short. It was afterward in the corridor that the thing happened that Maya had not prepared for. Not in front of witnesses. Just in the hallway between the conference room and the exit, where institutional fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and it smelled of old coffee and the staleness of any building where difficult things have been decided for a long time. Voss was ahead of her. He slowed. She slowed. They stood in the corridor with no one else nearby. He did not look at her directly for a moment. He was 48 years old and looked in that corridor like a man who had aged a decade in the past 2 hours. The composure was still there, but it was sitting differently on him, the way a coat sits on a man who has just heard something that has shifted the weight he carries. He said, "She called my name when she pulled me out." His voice was level. He was not performing this, even then. In the dark with the debris coming down with the smoke. She said my name. He stopped. Maya looked at him. She had thought about this moment for 2 years. Had rehearsed versions of it in the dark on nights when the anger was loudest. The versions she had rehearsed did not resemble what she said now. She would have done it for anyone, Maya said. You know that. That was who she was. She would have gone back in for any one of you. Voss absorbed this. The question isn't who she was, Maya said. You already know who she was. You knew it in Syria. You knew it before Syria. The question is who you are now with all of it. She was not forgiving him. She understood the difference between acknowledging someone's pain and absolving them of its causes. She was not in the business of absolution and suspected she never would be. Rachel was in the ground at Arlington, and no conversation in any corridor would change that geometry. But there was a difference between carrying anger and being carried by it. Rachel had taught her that distinction not by explaining it, but by living as if the distinction mattered until it did. Voss looked at her for a long moment. I'll support the evaluation findings, he said. Whatever changes come from it. I'll support them. She nodded once. They went in different directions down the corridor. She did not look back. The graduation ceremony was held on the 15th day on the parade ground where it had all begun. The California morning was doing what California mornings did in late summer, performing optimism with the particular lavishness of a place that had very little weather to complain about. The ocean was visible between two buildings, blue and flat and patient. Flags moved in a light westerly. Families filled the folding chairs along the perimeter. People who had spent 2 weeks wondering and waiting and now sat with the concentrated attention of those about to see someone they love receive something that cost them considerably. Sarah Calloway sat in the third row. She had spent the past 4 days understanding the full shape of the photograph she had taken. Admiral Haynes had called her personally to explain that what she had inadvertently exposed had not destroyed an evaluation, but had instead accelerated a process that needed accelerating. She was not yet sure how to feel about any of it, but she was here watching her brother stand in the formation, and Jake Calloway in dress uniform was a different physical object than the Jake Calloway who had gotten off a transport bus 2 weeks before. He was the same size. He occupied different space. Haynes took the podium. He did not have Harmon's parade ground thunder. He had something else instead, the particular authority of someone who had earned the right to speak quietly and still be heard in the back row. 40 years of command gave a voice a quality that volume alone could never replicate. He talked about what had happened during the past 2 weeks, not in the manner of official accounts with passive voice and institutional distance, in the way of a man who had been watching closely and wanted to say what he had seen directly. He talked about capability and assumption, about the distance between them, about a system built to find the best and the ways in which good systems could still carry habits that worked against their own stated purpose, the way a structurally sound building can still have cracks in its foundation that a diligent engineer would want to find and address. He talked about the 4 people pulled from the water. He talked about the 2 candidates found in the hills at dawn. Then he talked about Rachel Aldridge. He said her name plainly without ceremony, the way you say the name of someone who deserves to be spoken of directly. He said what she had done in Syria, the full account of it, including the 11 seconds that had been missing from the record for 2 years. He said that her final transmission had been, for the record, I am flagging this assessment as high risk. He said that the record would now carry it. The parade ground was very quiet. The Rachel Aldridge Leadership Award had been established in the 72 hours preceding the ceremony, which was either unusually fast for a military institution or exactly the speed at which a military institution moves when the people with authority have decided that moving quickly is what the moment requires. The award was a coin, one side Aldridge's name in 1994, the year she graduated BUD/S. The other side, a hand reaching down, another hand reaching up. No text, just the image. Haynes called the names. Jake Calloway stepped forward and received his coin with both hands, and something in his face was doing several things at once. The formal gravity of the ceremony, and underneath it, something more personal. The look of a man who had arrived 2 weeks ago trying to prove something to a father who would not answer the phone, and who had discovered somewhere along the way that what he was actually proving it to was himself, which was the only proving that would ever matter. He had called his father from a payphone at the Coronado Airfield 2 days ago and not gotten an answer and left a message anyway. 3 minutes of it saying things he had never said, not because he was certain they would be received, but because they were true and true things deserved to be said out loud. Marco Vitelli took his coin with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that some objects carry weight beyond their mass. In his wallet was still a GED certificate, but it sat differently in there now than it had 2 weeks ago. No longer. Something undecided, no longer suspended between pride and shame. Just a fact about him. One fact among many. None of them, the whole story. Dana Reeves stood in front of Haynes and received the coin, and her jaw was set and her eyes were clear. She had already decided in the seconds between her name being called and her feet reaching the front what she was going to do when she got home. Some decisions do not need more time. They just need the right moment to become obvious. Ryan Novak was last. He stood in front of Haynes and took his coin and held it in his palm and looked at the image on the face of it for a longer moment, a hand reaching down, another reaching up. He had received something this week that he had not known when he stepped off the bus that he needed. It had come from Maya late on the 3rd evening in the plane, and specific language of someone telling a true thing about a person who deserved to be remembered truly. His brother had not quit. Alexander Novak had died from a cardiac condition no one had known he carried. He had died in the company of people who were trying to save him. He had died as still moving forward. Ryan had spent 3 years carrying a story that was wrong in every particular that mattered, and the weight of the wrong story had been something he had grown so accustomed to that he had stopped recognizing it as weight. He had thought it was just what grief felt like. He knew now that it was not. After the ceremony, Decker found Maya at the edge of the parade ground where the folding chairs were being stacked and the families were collecting around their graduates. He stood beside her and watched the scene without urgency. She had the coin he had given her 2 nights ago in her hand. She had been carrying it since. She turned it once in her fingers. She was thorough, Maya said. Always, Decker agreed. She prepared for the possibility that it would take this long. She prepared for most possibilities. It was how she operated. Maya looked at the coin. How do I give this forward, she said. How do I know when it's the right time and the right person? Decker considered this with the patience of a man who had learned that some questions deserved actual consideration rather than immediate response. Rachel gave it to me because I was the person she trusted to hold it until it was needed, he said. She didn't give me instructions because she understood that instructions would have been the wrong kind of help. He paused. You'll know. Maya nodded. She looked across the parade ground to where Harmon was standing with Jake Calloway and his sister Sarah, the three of them working something out between them. She would find out later that Harmon had talked to Jake about his father, not private details. Nothing that breached confidence, just what 30 years of watching men come through this place had taught him about the ones who came back changed in the different ways they handled it. The ones who talked about it. The ones who made their silence a wall. The ones whose silence was love, turned inward and compressed until it had no choice but to be hard. It had not resolved anything between Jake and his father. Resolution was not a thing that happened in a conversation on a parade ground, but something had shifted in the space where the distance between them lived, and sometimes a shift was all that was needed to make distance crossable. The report was submitted to Admiral Haynes at 1800 hours on the 15th day. 43 pages. Thorough in the way Rachel had taught thoroughness, precise and complete, and leaving no gap that a motivated opponent could use. The core findings were direct. Initial capability assessment had shown bias based on physical profile in 47% of documented evaluator interactions. That bias had persisted on average for 3.2 days following first contact, despite consistent evidence of high-level technical performance. Evaluators using blind assessment protocols reviewing performance data without accompanying physical descriptions showed a 61% improvement in accuracy. Equipment allocation had been standardized by day 4 of the evaluation, but the first 3 days had documented 8 instances of candidates receiving improperly fitted gear with no correction protocol. The pre-assessment form used in Petty Officer Cole's cohort contained pre-completed fields that did not reflect observed performance. The recommendations addressed the inputs, not the people. Blind assessment periods during initial evaluation phases. Standardized equipment allocation from day 1 requisitioned from the manifest the night before each cohort arrived. Revised pre-assessment protocols removing fields not tied to observed performance. Mandatory instructor training on the specific ways in which experience could produce over-calibrated certainty. Hargrove called Maya at 2200 that night to confirm receipt. Well done, Commander. Tell me something actually changes, Maya said. A pause. Harmon started something yesterday, Hargrove said. You'll want to hear about it. 2 weeks after Maya Callahan left Coronado, a new training cohort arrived. The transport pulled through the main gate at 14:30 hours on a Sunday afternoon in early September. The light, the same gold it always was at that hour. The salt air, the same, the parade ground, exactly as it had been on the afternoon. 25 recruits had filed off a different bus, and one of them had made a Master Chief revise everything he thought he understood about what he was looking at. Harmon stood at the edge of the parking area with his hands clasped behind his back and watched the door open. He still made his calculations. The reflex did not simply switch off because a person had spent 2 weeks being wrong about something significant, but he had learned in those 2 weeks to hold the calculations loosely, to treat them as first drafts rather than conclusions, to wait for the evidence to speak before deciding he already knew what it was going to say. The recruits came off the bus in the usual mixture of nervous energy and performed confidence. Near the back of the group, stepping down carefully, was a small woman, 5'3" perhaps, fair-haired, slightly built, looking around at the facility with wide eyes. She looked like most of them did on the first day. He had no idea yet what she was. That was the point. He had checked the manifest the night before. He had made the appropriate requisitions from supply that morning. He walked toward her now before she could get turned around, looking for the formation line with a set of properly fitted fatigues in his hands. Not the smallest we have. The right size for her specifically. It had taken one conversation with Hargrove and 10 minutes of administrative work to make this standard procedure. He had spent a week afterward wondering why it had taken him as long as it had. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people quickly and was currently reading him, trying to determine what kind of place this was, what kind of man he was, whether she was going to be given a fair chance here. He held out the uniform. "Welcome to Naval Special Warfare Training," he said. "What size boots do you need?" She blinked. A small thing. The right question asked at the right time to the right person. No ceremony in it. No acknowledgement of what it had taken to get here, to this question, this moment. Just the beginning of seeing clearly. She told him. He made a note. He handed her the fatigues. He pointed her toward the formation line and moved on to the next recruit. Behind him, she looked down at the uniform in her hands, properly fitted, already hers. And something in the set of her shoulders changed very slightly in the way that a person's body changes when they receive an early signal before anything has been proven or demonstrated that they might be in a place where they will be seen for what they are. She walked toward the formation. Somewhere over the Middle East, at 0300 local time, a helicopter flew low and fast through darkness that had no edges. Maya Callahan sat against the fuselage with her team around her in the compressed quiet that follows a completed mission. The air smelled of exhaust and altitude in the specific cold of high desert at night. Through the porthole, the stars were extraordinary, the kind of sky that only exists this far from any city, so many of them and so clear that the darkness between them seemed almost incidental. She held the chain in her hand, 3 things on it now, her own dog tags, Rachel's dog tags, and the challenge coin from 1994 drilled and threaded, worn smooth by 30 years of being held by people who understood what it was worth. She thought about Harmon asking the right question. She thought about Jake, who had called his father and left 3 minutes of truth on voicemail, because true things deserve to be said out loud even when you were not certain they would be received. She thought about Dana, who had submitted the file the morning after graduation and had written 1 week later to say it's in motion now. Someone has to move it. She thought about Ryan teaching water survival at the pool, telling the story of his brother, not as a story of failure, but as what it actually was, a man who went all the way to the edge of what he had and kept moving. She thought about Amber Cole, reinstated 3 days ago to a preparatory training cohort under the new assessment protocols, whose technical scores reevaluated under the blind assessment system placed her in the top 15% of her group. She thought about Voss, who had called once 3 weeks after Coronado not to apologize, but to tell her he had submitted a memo recommending the blind assessment protocols be adopted across 3 additional training commands. He had not asked for acknowledgement. He had stated it and ended the call. She thought it's something. She thought it's a beginning. She thought about the 4th file on the USB, the handwritten page. The truth has a way of waiting. Rachel had written that, had sealed it in an envelope, and handed it to an old man who had kept it 30 years and given it forward at exactly the right moment, because that was the kind of thing Rachel did, planning for the futures she might not live to see, building contingencies for inconvenient truths that powerful men would try to close doors on, leaving provisions for the work that would continue after her. That was the legacy, not the medals, not the record times, not the 43-page report circulating through offices with the authority to act on it. The legacy was the provision, the coin held in trust, the USB sealed against the day it would be necessary, the habit of telling the truth into the record, even when the record was the only witness, because the record had a way of surviving. The helicopter banked and the stars shifted, and the darkness outside resolved slowly into the pale suggestion of a horizon. East, somewhere, morning was assembling itself. Another day coming. Maya let the tags and the coin settle back against her chest. She closed her eyes. She thought about the woman on the parade ground holding a properly fitted uniform and feeling for the first time the specific relief of being in a place that had asked the right question before she had to prove anything. She thought about Harmon's face when he had finally understood what he had been looking at for 3 days, and the way he had not defended himself or explained himself, but had simply asked with the directness of a man accepting an accounting, "What did I miss?" She thought about Rachel, 22 years old, walking off the BUD/S graduation field into a Navy that did not yet know what to make of her, carrying a coin she would hold for 8 years before deciding who needed it next. She thought about what it meant to leave something forward. Not a monument, not a memorial, just a better question asked a little earlier to the next person who steps off the next bus. Every day, Rachel, every single day. The helicopter flew on through the last of the darkness, and ahead of it, the horizon was lightening, and the stars were beginning one by one to give way to the coming day.